Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the changing role of accountants, preparing students to be career ready with data analytics skills. Thank you for taking time out of your day today to be with us. I'm Lula March. I'm part of the accounting team here at McGraw Hill, Canada. We've also got Alwyn Pinard with us. Alwyn, if you want to do a quick wave. Alwyn is our senior portfolio manager on the accounting team as well. Today, McGraw Hill is hosting various sessions for business economics, computing, and student success faculty. In fact, many of you may have already joined one of our sessions earlier today. I just wanted to let you know that the recordings from today's session will be uploaded on our registration page. Here you can have access to all the day's sessions and watch on demand at your convenience. Please note the page will be updated by the end of the day, and you will receive a follow-up note or a follow-up email with instructions on how to access the webinar recordings. The follow-up email will also provide you with the option of downloading a professional development certificate that shows that you have participated in our event today. So before we jump into our topic, our main topic today, and I hand it over to Vern, there are a couple of housekeeping items. Today's session is 45 minutes in length. As we do have a large group today, your lines are muted and the videos are deactivated to really ensure a smooth webinar experience. So for questions, we're really encouraging you to post your questions in the Q&A. We've got a McGraw Hill team here on the back end that will be answering questions as they come, and we'll be filtering those up to Vern as well. And if we have time, we'll have some Q&A at the end of the session as well. So after today's webinar, as I mentioned, you will receive an email follow-up. In that email, there'll also be a link to a survey. We please encourage you to take that survey and share your suggestions as we develop other webinars to help suit your interests and your needs. So with that, I am pleased to introduce our speaker for today. As we all know that there has been lots of buzz around data analytics. So today we've got Vernon Richardson, our author of Data Analytics for Accounting 2nd edition and Data Analytics for Introductory Accounting 1st edition, as he discusses best practices for teaching and learning data analytics and how to effectively implement into your classrooms. Vernon is a distinguished professor of accounting at the W. Gleason Chair in the Sam M. Walton College of Business at the University of Arkansas. He has received his BA, MA, and MBA from Brigham Young University and a PhD in accounting from the University of Illinois. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Vern. So I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Okay, are you able to see my screen okay?
We're good, yep.
Excellent. Hey, so we have a brief 45-minute period, so we'll just kind of jump in. We're going to cover a few topics. One is how and where data analytics should be covered in the accounting curriculum. And then we're going to talk about our two textbooks, the Intro to Data Analytics for Accounting and Data Analytics for Accounting. One of our jobs is to kind of explain how these are different. And so we'll do that. And then finally, at the end, we'll talk a little bit about Connect. So as you know, there's a huge amount of data out there, and this has changed. I look back when I graduated in 1991, and it was probably negative at that point. There was no information, right? But it's growing very quickly, and this data availability and just the access to computers and computer systems and machine learning is really changing accounting. And so we want to get in front of that, and we want to be able to analyze data. And so the role of accountants is really evolving, changing. And we used to be the primary preparers of information, and we still are. But given that there's so much information out there, we need to kind of change our role to be more of an expert interpreter and an analyst in addition to preparing data. And so that's what the role that we're preparing for. So there's kind of four possibilities of how you would cover data analytics in the accounting curriculum. It's either at the beginning, it's at the end, it's throughout the curriculum, or some combination of the three. I think, Lola, were we going to run a survey at this point, asking where you covered your firm? So here it is, and really looking at where you might cover it. Is it the beginning? Is it throughout the curriculum? Is it the end? Or some combination of the few? So really looking at that. And so perhaps we can share those results with everyone. But as we think about it, we have kind of two books, and the two books are Introduction to Data Analytics for Accounting, which is first edition, came out May 2020. And we have our second edition, which is Data Analytics for Accounting that is now in second edition and actually preparing for the third. And so I hope you're able to see on your screen, it looks like most are either doing it throughout the curriculum or some combination of the above. And so certainly looking at that possibility. Our idea in covering it at the beginning was to cover it at the beginning, and then they would have the skills to then do it throughout the rest of the curriculum. And some like to see a back-end course just kind of as almost a capstone of what we're looking at. So when we were trying to figure out how to do this, I ran a survey of data analytics professors, and I pretty much said, okay, what should be the primary focus of the first course? And so this is kind of what came out. So these first 4 items: learning the basic tools, basic data visualizations, asking and answering accounting questions, basic problem solving, and then the basic types of data analytics, that'd be descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive, would all be in the intro data analytics textbook. And that's essentially how we've designed it. The advanced data analytics book is more at the end of the curriculum, and that's kind of more advanced. So it's the cleaning, it's extracting data from large data sets. We call this ETL, extract, transform, and load. Learning the more advanced tools, advanced data visualizations, and perhaps getting into machine learning and programming and so forth in R, Python. And so here's kind of the way these books roll out. The first one is Introduction to Data Analytics and Accounting. The prereq for that class is Intro Financial and Intro Managerial. You have to have something to talk about. And so that's where we slated, you've got to have that basic knowledge. We're going to emphasize Excel and Tableau, and there's not really any extracting from large data sets. We essentially give you all the data you'll need. Today, we'll actually give you examples of 2 of the labs that are in the Intro to Data Analytics for Accounting textbook. We use what's called the AMPS model, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. And what we really want is a foundation for students to have a foundation on which to build, and so they can know where we're at in the data analytics process. The type of instructions is there's the traditional chapters, traditional end of chapter, but then a bunch of labs, 50 plus labs here in this type of book. And we'll do an example of a couple of them. Now, the other end of the curriculum is the data analytics for accounting that's now in second edition. And that's really slated for the last class at the end of their undergraduate or in the postgraduate master's program. That kind of presumes you know all the accounting questions, so we won't spend a lot of time kind of introducing you to the accounting questions because we hope you already know them. And then there's using a whole bunch of tools, including Excel, Tableau, or Power BI, SQL Server to extract large data sets. We have a remote desktop that we use. I'll talk about that more in a minute. The extract, transform, and load is rather extensive. I mean, we're using huge data sets and we're extracting information that's relevant. And so there's going to be a remote desktop. So this data is housed here at the University of Arkansas and primarily using Dillard's data. We use what we call as the impact model, and that's kind of the foundation we use. It's a little more extensive, a little more built out than is the AMPS model. We use a lot of tools, a lot of conceptual, try to be higher end learning. There's a kind of a third area, and that's the advanced data analytics for accounting. And that's an area that is valuable, but we don't cover in our textbooks. And that might be programming in R or Python or machine learning. We don't really get there in this course. And often this relies on some background of the instructor, which is awesome if they know that and can teach that. But that's not where we play with these books. So talking first about the Introduction to Data Analytics for Accounting, and that's the dedicated course at the beginning. Very proud of our book. We're excited about it. We think there's a huge need for this. And so we've built this course out. It revolves around the AMPS model. The AMPS model is A, ask the question, M, for master the data, P, perform the analysis, and S, share the story. And then it's kind of iterative where we're going to continue to learn, continue to refine the question, and continue to go through. So these next few slides, and even the book is built on the AMPS model. So what are the questions? Typically, accounting questions come in 4s. They're descriptive analytics, asking what happened. Typically, that's what we have in the financial statements. They report what happened. Why did it happen? That's kind of more auditing question. Look for outliers, anomalies, unknown patterns that we're going to look for. And so there's questions that say why. And then there's some predictive analytics. Something we haven't done as well in accounting, in my belief. We've done a lot of what happened, looking in the past, but not done near as well at predicting the future. And so we're going to forecast. We're going to use some regression, some time series, and some classification activities. There's also some prescriptive analytics, and that's kind of the what if scenario. What should we do? How do we optimize based on changing conditions or changing constraints? How do we optimize? What decisions do we make? I like to think of this as what if activities. So remember, we're looking at the AMS model, the AMPS. So the A is ask the question. And here's the types of questions just kind of broken down. Here's again, the descriptive is what happened, diagnostic, why did it happen, predictive, predicting the future, prescriptive, what should we do? And here's the type of questions, and then the type of techniques that we'd be teaching. So if it's a descriptive type question, the analytics we do is, hey, we're going to provide some summary, a count, a total, a sum, a min, a max, a histogram, a pivot table. That's what we're going to do to answer questions like, did we make a profit last year? Did the airline companies on-time departures improve the past month? How much did we pay in federal taxes and so forth? Diagnostic, I usually think of this as audit. We're really looking for anomalies, looking for root causes, and really goes well with audit analytics. And I actually have a research paper we just submitted to the Journal of Accounting Research, looking at diagnostic and how valuable that is to particularly internal auditors. But we're going to be looking for a lot of anomalies and outliers. So we're going to talk a lot about expectations, a lot of kind of variance analysis, conditional formatting that we'll be using to kind of answer these questions. The predictive analysis is predicting. So will the company go bankrupt? Should we extend credit? Will they pay their loan when it's due? Can we forecast earnings? Can we predict stock returns and so forth? We're going to use classifications, regressions, some simulation, and some time series. And then prescriptive analytics, those types of things. We're doing some optimization, some what if scenarios, some cash flow analysis, some goal seek, break even, for example. Hey, if we want to have what the level of sales that allows us to break even, what is that number? Should the company rent or lease its headquarters? If we have all 12/31 year-end audit clients, how should we organize ourselves in our audit work in the next year? So a lot of what if analysis. So that kind of sets us up for our analysis. So those are the questions. That's the A in AMPS. M is master the data. And so we kind of go through this and say, what are the possible data sources? Are they the right data? Are they of high enough quality? If we have this data, will it answer our question? And so really looking at those qualities. So for P is perform the analysis. We have more than 50 labs, including items like Benford's Law, Altman Z, which I'll show an example of, estimating ABC cost drivers. I'll also show a brief example of that, estimating cost behavior, fixed and variable costs, looking for outliers, using conditional formatting, gap detection, sequence checks, duplicate checks, some forecasting, and I'll provide an example of that. A goal seek, so break even, or students really like, what is the grade needed on my final to still get a high mark in this class? Some scenario analyses, some fuzzy matching to look at names and addresses of employees and vendors to see if they're similar, if there's related party transaction. We do some hypothesis testing. So we form the hypothesis and actually do some testing. And then there's some questions of operations. I believe we have or will shortly provide a list of all of the labs and which course they most belong to. And I'll have an example of that at the end. So one example of the lab is to predict bankruptcy. And so in order to predict bankruptcy, we just use Altman Z. Some of you are familiar with that. It really lends well to the class exercise where we have kind of a model. We have 5 factors. So here they are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So here's the basic 5 measures to deal with liquidity, long-term profitability, short-term profitability, long-term solvency, and asset utilization. And so what I have the students do is I give them the component parts and I have them derive these 5 factors. Then I have them apply a weight to each of these 5 factors, and it comes up with a score. And based on the score, it tells you where they're at. And so we use a histogram and essentially say, hey, based on our analysis, Altman Z, are they in the distress zone? Are they in the gray zone? Or are they in the safe zone? So what I'm hoping to do here is provide an example of this. And I sent ahead, I hope you'll have access to these files. And I just kind of want to show how this all works. Hopefully you're able to see this okay. And so here's the raw factors. So this just comes from CompuStat essentially. So here are current assets, total assets, earnings before interest and taxes, current liabilities, long-term liabilities, net income, RE stands for retained earnings, sales, and the market value of equity. So essentially those are all the component parts. And here we have now formed these 5 factors. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So where does 5 come from? Well, it is current assets minus current liabilities divided by total assets. And so I have students make up these factors for each of these and do the same thing for, number 2. And number 2 is essentially retained earnings divided by assets. That's a measure of long-term profitability. And so you can see each of these 5 factors. This allows a really rich discussion of what predicts bankruptcy. And I realized the Altman Z was done 50 years ago, and there's more advanced research done in this area, but this is a great exercise for students to not just say, hey, we're going to predict bankruptcy. Now we're going to talk through each of the 5 factors, apply a weighting, and actually form a histogram. So what I want to do here briefly, hopefully you can see my screen okay, is I've done each of these 5 factors, and I'll just double click to make it for all of them. And then I did a weighting, so essentially Altman Z, and might be hard to see, but here is the weighting of each of those 5 factors. And so I'll form each of those 5 factors. And so this one has a score of 2.5. And so now we can kind of extend that down. So all, I don't know how many are in this data set, looks like 2,329 data points here. And each of them have an Altman Z score. And so one of the things we'll do is we'll go to the data and the data analysis tab. And I will select histogram. This has got to be really small on your screen, but we use the data analysis toolpack. And so I select histogram. And now what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to figure out the input range. And the input range is just going to be, hey, these Altman Z scores. And so I'm going to select all of those. And what is the bin? And the bins we're going to use are essentially these cutoff scores. And that was 1.8 and 3.0. And I'm going to click on the labels here, and I'm going to hit OK. And lo and behold, I get a histogram. And essentially in these areas, here's how it broke down. So 1508 are in the safe zone. 305 are in the risky zone. This happens to be a sample of retail firms. My thought was that Amazon and Walmart appear to be putting a lot of other retail companies out of business, and certainly COVID is doing the same, but putting them into a histogram. So going through all these steps, that would be a lab. The lab would take probably 25 minutes, just working from scratch, and that would be a completed lab. Are there any questions about that, Lola? Anybody's written any questions about that? Maybe we're okay. Okay.
Yeah, there was a quick question that says, how are the weights calculated in Altman Z?
Yeah, excellent. That's a great question. And that comes from theory. And so let me see if I can click back on this. These weights came from Altman Z's paper of 1969. So here's the weight: 1.2, 1.4, 3.3, 0.6, and 1.0. And he got it from using discriminant analysis and putting weights, just like you'd run a regression and have coefficients with these certain weights. So that's how we came up with them. And certainly we're drawing on, and as much as possible, trying to go back to research. I probably in the book probably referenced 20 to 25 academic studies. I think that's about right. Okay, so these would put them in the various groups of distress zone, gray zone, and safe zone. And this allows for a really rich discussion. So it's one thing to have the students click here and click there to go through all the parts. What's valuable for me is to actually talk about it in class. And so a lot of these labs, I actually have them do on their own the night before we do the discussion. And then I'm ready to talk. They've gone through the analysis, they've answered the questions, and now we can talk about the weights. Why are the weights? Okay, what is Z score? What does that count for? Is this a normal distribution from the Z score? How did we get these weights? And actually, I talked through the case of Apple that before Steve Jobs was rehired in the 90s, almost went bankrupt. And so was in real close to the distress zone. So it allows for a really rich discussion. The next lab I want to talk about is the forecast earnings. Now, I don't believe we've done, I believe in general, and I've been teaching in accounting for, 23 years, something like that. And I think we do a horrible job of forecasting. We're really good at measuring the past. We've got 3 intermediate accounting classes here that measure the past really well, but almost no class, except for maybe managerial, that predicts the future. And I just hope we get better at that. And so there's a study by DeChow and Schran that talks about the persistence. So sales is really persistent. Cash flows, not so persistent. Operating income, accrual-based income, much more persistent. And so we're going to talk through the persistence and talk about why that's important. Now, I just want to kind of run through a lab. And so this comes straight from the lab. I think this is lab 8-6. I've provided this to you. And so you can use this. But essentially, this is about the easiest lab on the face of the earth. But it allows for a really rich study. So all I got to do is highlight. I could either do sales or I could do income before extraordinary items. And actually, the lab does both. And I'm just going to highlight all of them. And all I've got to do is go to data, and Microsoft 2016, Excel 2016 has something called a forecast sheet. So I click on the forecast sheet, and lo and behold, there's my forecast. Now I can set a whole bunch of options, but this allows me to look at seasonality for IBM. It looks at the projections for the future. It has an upper and lower confidence band. We're able to specify what time range we use, what values we use, how we're going to deal with missing data points, and how we're going to aggregate duplicates and so forth. But this is a really rich exercise for them to use. So I have my students go and forecast, and not only do it here, but do it in other settings. So sales, cash flows, operating income, so are all possibilities. So this is an example of a lab. This lab takes about 20 minutes. Not so bad, and the students are able to do it. So that is an example of this lab. Okay, so then we talked through that, and I think it's a really rich exercise. I want to just kind of point out one more, and we're not going to actually do this one, but here's an example of a regression analysis. And this particular regression analysis is estimating cost drivers. So first, what are the appropriate cost drivers? This particular lab has 5 candidate drivers. 2 of them come out as significant, and so we extract and just use these 2. And then we're able to put a cost associated with the driver. So in this case, the analysis was miles per delivery and time per delivery were the essentially the winning cost drivers, the ones that were statistically significant. You'll remember managerial cost accounting. Usually we just say, and drop down from heaven, here is your cost drivers. And lo and behold, we could have done a really rich exercise using some regression analysis. So that's just an example of that. Hopefully that's useful. All right, so remember it's AMS. Ask the question, master the data, P, perform the analysis, S, share the story. So we want to spend some time on visualizations, some charts, some graphs, some reports talking about, what data should be in a pie chart, what data should be in a line chart, what data should be in a heat map, and so forth. And so we certainly spend plenty of time. There's a chapter based on that. So here is the textbook. This is the layout. A is for ask the question, that's chapter 1. The red here is master the data, so types of data, preparing the data sources, knowing which ones have which qualities. And then the real emphasis of the book is probably chapters 5 through 9. That's the type of analysis. So we have a chapter for each type. First, chapter 5, introducing all the analyses. And then chapter 6 is descriptive, 7, diagnostic, 8, predictive, 9, prescriptive. And then chapter 10 is our S for share the story. And then we have a project at the end, and it's much more open-ended, much less hand-holding, where the students go through and ask a question. They have to find the data. Usually I meet with them during the semester and I say, hey, great question. I don't know that the data is going to answer that. And so certainly talking through that with them is a different aspect for them to use. And I've done both individual and group projects. So as far as lab goes, there's 50 labs. Each lab has 2 data sets. So usually the first data set, it has lots of hand holding with step-by-step instructions. And then I have them take a quiz, and they can take it as many times as they want. Then I give them a second data set and pretty much say, here's the second data set, good luck. And then they're to do that on their own. And then that is the quiz, essentially the assessment that's done at the end. And so that's pretty typical. Almost all, maybe except for 1 or 2, use that format. So there's Connect here. It's got lab assessment as a smart book. We've made videos for every lab and for every lecture. We've got a pre-built course in Connect. There's test banks, PowerPoints, instructor manuals, easy access to data sets, and so forth. As an example of the access to data sets, so what happens is we provide, essentially a linked Word document that essentially has access to every data set. So they don't have to go really looking. They just have to have, one Word document, and you click on it and you get the data. So everything's there. And that's much different than probably what is in the other textbook, where you have to actually do some work to get the data set. All right. So now let's talk for a minute about data analytics for accounting. Data analytics for accounting is the end of the senior year capstone. I know you don't use the word senior, so one of the last classes in the undergraduate experience, or at least here at the University of Arkansas, it was the postgraduate. You know, everyone's kind of going through a different scenario. First, our postgraduate course was an elective, now it's required. Then we did our undergraduate classes an elective, and now it's required. And so just kind of going through these steps to get it in the curriculum. So again, remember, this is the one where lots of ETL. ETL stands for extract, transform, and load. And so there's lots of accessing the data, getting it ready for use. Lots of tools would be used there. And again, this one that presumes you know the accounting questions. So we're not going to be talking about a lot about what is an audit, you know, what are the aims of managerial accounting, or what is the cost driver, and so forth. No overlap in labs. I think there's a few where we use similar data sets. We use what's called a lending club data. Lending club data is a peer-to-peer lender, and they've given us rights to their data to use for this course. And so we use some of that in both courses, but asking questions like, hey, you know, will this loan pay off? And so we know if the loan paid off, we know what interest rate we're given. We know if they rejected the loan or accepted the loan, all based on data that they've shared with us. So the impact model is used in the data analytics for accounting textbook. Remember, this is the impact model. So I for identify the question, M for master the data, P for perform the test plan, A for address and refine, C for communicate insights, and T for tracking the outcomes in the form of typically of dashboards. And so this is a little richer, a little fuller explanation that you'd expect for a master's level textbook. A big part of this text is the comprehensive labs. And so the comprehensive labs use Dillard's department store data, and Dillard's essentially has given us past data, includes more than 360 million transactions. Those of you that are familiar, it's really a sales journal. I mean, what they've given us is a sales journal. So we can ask all sorts of sales questions by location, by type, by internet versus non-internet sales, by sales on Saturday versus Sunday, you know, all those types of questions. So 20 labs throughout the book use that data, and it's really rich. It is housed here at the University of Arkansas. So we give everyone remote desktop connections, really robust server that works quite well. The other good thing about the remote desktop is particularly for Mac users. So for example, a Mac doesn't have the forecast sheet I just showed you a minute ago in Excel. And Power BI, for example, mine does not work on Mac. And so what happens is you get access to the remote desktop, and the remote desktop will essentially is a Windows-based computer, and then you're able to access all of those. And so both for the Intro to Data Analytics for Accounting as well as the Data Analytics for Accounting textbook, we send many of our students to, and throughout the world, I mean, literally access throughout the world, this remote desktop works quite well. Here is the table of contents. So the first 4 chapters kind of form the foundation of the impact model. And then chapters 5 through 9, really 5 and 6 are audit, 7 is managerial, 8 is financial statement analysis, 9 is tax, and then chapters 10 and 11 are kind of your project chapters. Chapter 10 is kind of those that don't use the remote desktop, don't use Dillard's data, and then chapter 11 does. So some want to cover it all. Some say, hey, I love the course, I love the book, but we're not going to use Dillard's. We've decided not to. Great, then chapter 10 is for you. And so we've tried to kind of please all parties that way. There are a number of appendices. So the appendices have basic statistics, the data analysis toolpack in Excel, Power BI, Power Queries, SQL, Tableau, data dictionaries, and so forth, and as well as just some basic Excel, you know, formatting, sorting, filtering, and pivot tables. Remember, this is the more advanced book, but certainly if you need to or desire, or your students aren't quite up to par in a particular tool, software tool, they can go to these tutorials, and either you can assign it in class, or you can just you know, do it together, or you could just assign it out. So there's a lot of instructor resources available. software installation guides, access to the remote desktop, some lab troubleshooting and tips, sample course outlines and slides, video instruction on both the labs and the lectures. So we aim for there to be everything you need. Usually what happens is the constraint in this course is the professor, not the students. Because the professor, it's just a different animal. If you've been teaching financial accounting and you're using essentially the same PowerPoint deck you've used the last 30 years, that certainly is possible. For this class, not quite as easy. And so we try to do quite a bit of hand-holding, particularly for the instructor, so that they have what they need to be successful in the course. And so hopefully that is helpful for you. This is just kind of a screen grab from Connect. And this is, I think, from Introduction to Data Analytics for Accounting. No, it looks like Data Analytics for Accounting, but essentially we have the textbook, the lecture video, multiple choice questions, problems, a quiz, and then we start with the labs. So here's lab 6.1 with the video and lab 6.1 with the instructions. And so kind of all the parts are there to help facilitate learning. This is something I've asked McGraw Hill candidate to provide. This is essentially the topics of the various labs. And so you can see the labs, like, for example, 2.1 and 2.2, 2.1 would be done in Excel, 2.2 would be done in Tableau. And those accounts receivable summary belong in the intro financial or possibly the intermediate class, or possibly even audit. And so this is just meant to say, which course does it fit in? And that's supposed to, hopefully give you some idea of the coverage. Some will consider some of these at the beginning. Some of these we've had people divvy up the book, based on the class that they're teaching at the moment. And so we've had, so we've provided this. This is for the Introduction to Data Analytics for Accounting. We've also, so here's the other half of the Introduction to Data Analytics for Accounting text, and kind of which one it belongs in and which technology it uses here. And so you can kind of see that. We've provided a spreadsheet. Well, all of that also gives you some idea of the estimated time to complete each.
Vern, I'm just going to jump in. I just wanted to say to everyone that the links to those files are posted into the chat. You can download those files directly from the links in chat.
Wonderful. So so we do that for both Introduction to Data Analytics for Accounting as well as Data Analytics for Accounting, and that's included there. I guess this one is Data Analytics for Accounting, so because it has the comprehensive cases, so that is there as well. We have built these courses with you in mind. We have tried to figure out what the instructor needs. We just believe that students need this, and that accounting curriculums are going to change. At some point, we expect all the textbooks to have a significant data analytics component. But what happens is, if you haven't been trained, or the students haven't been trained, for example, to use Power BI, and all of a sudden there's a Power BI course lab in intro accounting, neither the instructor nor the student is going to do that. What happens is they just skip it. And we wanted to give them the tools to be able to cover that. So I think that completes my prepared portion. Let me kind of hand it back over. I'm going to do a stop share, and we can certainly come back and look at that. So hopefully that provides a basic of what you need. So I guess I'm ready for questions, or I can keep quiet and listen to you, whatever works.
There was one question actually that came into the Q&A box, just asking how you see the impact of the pandemic, what you think the impact of the pandemic is on the delivery of your data analytics course. Has that changed for you at all, Vern, or do you find that you've been able to kind of pivot pretty well?
Well, because of Connect, everything is online ready. And so I'm teaching the undergraduate version of the course, and at least the way we envisioned it here, it was always an online course. And so it worked quite well. I guess I got less complaints from students because it was already built out and ready to go. But we really haven't seen that impact. I've also taught it at Baruch College, kind of just like everyone else, all remote. And because of the tools within Connect, because all the videos are there, because all the multiple choice questions are there. So, really all the basic stuff is sitting there. And what we really hope the instructor will do will build on that. I mean, working through these labs, because of the instructions given, is relatively easy. But what we're hoping for is that the extension happens more in the classroom. So hopefully that's, I hope that answered the question.
So sorry, there's a question coming in. Are the videos available for the Canadian edition? So the videos that go with Vern's text, any videos, you would be able to access them via Connect on the MH Canada platform as well. There should be no problem accessing any of those materials for your course. I'm sort of just keeping an eye on the chat as we go, but I think one thing, you know, certainly, Vern, I know from my conversations I've had with a lot of instructors here in Canada, Power BI is the tool of choice for CPA Canada. I think you and I have chatted about that a little bit. Maybe you could talk a little bit about any kind of plans for sort of Power BI labs or tools or sort of things that you're kind of looking at developing for your resources.
Yeah, we're continuing to build that up. What's happened in our data analytics for accounting, we're actually writing it as we speak. But we have what we have is a Microsoft track, which is Excel and Power BI. And then we have a Tableau track, which is Tableau Prep, and then desktop Tableau. And so any of the labs, you can choose either track or both tracks. And what happens is we're already using Power BI with Power Query and Power Pivot kind of throughout. We were probably a little more gun shy to build it out. We just told students this is Excel and all the tools are sitting right there. And in fact, they are, and they're all right there. But you know, others would say, hey, this isn't Excel, this is Power BI. Sometimes that line is a little less clear, but we are continuing to build that out and certainly hearing from you. So the firms within the US as well are trending toward Power BI, and that might cause us to lessen Tableau and push more to Power BI, particularly in the intro textbook. You know, it's always a trade-off because a lot of us don't believe that students have enough Excel to start with. And so the introduction to data analytics for accounting really pushes. So I would say 90% of the labs are Excel and 10% of them are Tableau at this point. And so that's been the emphasis there to really build that up. And then it's been the more advanced course, the data analytics for accounting, that really exploits the Power Query and Power Pivot. And those are extensively used, particularly in extracting data from the Dillard's data set.
One of the other sort of things I've heard people talk about before is the ability for students to practice looking at bad data and what bad data looks like and how they kind of work with a fix of that. Is that something sort of that you've kind of explored as you sort of work through sort of scrubbing data, having them look at it, making that sort of critical analysis?
So there is plenty of data preparation. So they always say the extract, transform, and load takes between 50 and 90% of the total time. I was just talking to Grant Thornton a couple hours ago, and like, yeah, that is absolutely true. That's how much time we're spending, but it's missing, it's bad data, it's looking at outliers, and auditors will want to see that because, you know, those are the outliers that they want to investigate further. But that is a big part of our analysis is preparing the data and looking essentially for bad data, which I would call diagnostic analytics, but typically using, you know, the ETL process to find that data. But yes,
okay,
particularly in the data analytics for accounting text.
Right. And in terms of access to data, I mean, I know sometimes that can be tricky too. And thankfully you have lots of sort of different data sets and materials that are available in the labs, but are there any sort of other good sources of data, places to go to find data so that students can be sort of using that or practicing with that?
Yeah, so particularly in my final project of the course, we give them a whole bunch of sites of data. And so Kaggle, for example, is a great source, kind of Airbnb type data is sitting there. But CalcBench is something that we use a lot of. I'm actually doing a webinar for CalcBench here in a couple of weeks. You know, and they use XBRL data to populate their data sets. And so, and typically for academic use, at least the basic use, it's free. And so, you know, usually our constraint has been free data. And so it's got to be free to students because someone doesn't, but, you know, for those of you who have Words or access to CompuStat or any of those, we try to really build up those connections. The problem is that some students, some universities don't have that, and others are. And so if you're interested, email me directly. I've got kind of my preparation for Introduction to Data Analytics for Accounting. I've been building up free data sources. It's expense data, a lot of New York City type data that's available. There's plenty of data that's out there. It's usually matching the question to the data, and usually I want my students to kind of do both, ask an interesting question, form a hypothesis, and I have a rubric that really says, did you form a hypothesis? Is it just a straw man or actually an interesting hypothesis? And then, are you actually doing different types of analytics? And then what happens is I provide them with maybe 20 to 30 free data sources. And so we use, for example, Yahoo Finance to get stock prices or financial statement data, CalcBench financial statement data. And so those are the basic types of data sources that we have available. And it'll end up being in the Introduction to Data Analytics for Accounting chapter, I guess at that point, chapter 12. But so we're building that in, but I'm happy to share. And I'll even send you the video I sent to students explaining it all and explaining the rubric, which was wonderful because then all the expectations were set up front, and then my grading was much easier.
Right, fair enough. Okay. There was a question here, if there's a way to move scrub data into audit software such as Caseware.
There is. So we have this trade-off between using lots of free tools and overwhelming the student. And certain if you're teaching audit, you're going to use IDEA or ACL or Caseware or something like that. And we have so we don't use Caseware, but certainly we have prepared the data to be used in multiple software tools. And so certainly that's possible. We have not done anything directly with Caseware. We have a lab or two that deals with IDEA, and usually and I don't know if Caseware is free or not for students. I do know that IDEA is free for students, and so that's been probably a bad decision point, but we pretty much said if it's free to students, it's good. Then everyone can have access, and we don't have to worry about it. And you'd hate to be an instructor and say, hey, you got to go buy 3 things of software in addition to a book, in addition to your tuition and everything else, and it's just kind of a non-starter. So
yeah, fair enough. Understood. I'm just looking through the questions here. I think we're clear. Kathy had a question about adding the bankruptcy indicator to finance titles. And so something certainly I can take offline, sort of in terms of how that would fit into our other titles. And I'll follow up on that one separately.
We are writing a financial statement analysis textbook with McGraw Hill, and that has data analytics kind of infused throughout. And so that bankruptcy lab appears there as well. So we believe it belongs in every course, and maybe that's a problem.
Yeah.
Why I can't sleep at night is I just keep thinking of new labs and new things that could be done. And my wife's
I don't understand how you have time for sleep between the books and the teaching and being here with us today. So we definitely appreciate you taking the time to join us for this webinar today. You've always been very generous with your time and encourage people to reach out if they have questions, which certainly
I did want to just point that out very quickly. Is my authorship team, we try to help everybody. So if you have a question, trying to get it through the curriculum committee or anything like that, whether you buy the book or not, that's your choice. But please reach out to us and let us try to help.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Vern. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Lots of really great information. Really good questions that have come through. So with that, I'd like to end today's session. Thanks again for joining us. If you've got any further questions or if you'd like access to any of Vern's textbooks, please feel free to reach out to your McGraw Hill account manager. They'll certainly make sure that you've got access. Thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon. Take care.
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care, Vern. Thanks again.
Thanks, Vern.